Hey, this is just a quick response video to the Unbelievable podcast. Well, I listen to it as a podcast, hosted by Justin Brierley. Justin, if you do happen to get this, I'll talk as if I'm addressing you. But I was watching your show or listening to your show, and something stuck out back in August of 2008, an old episode with Ariane Shireen, I think her name is, or Ariane, I forget. But the woman who organized the atheist bus campaign. And what stuck out to me about it was the first time that I'd ever heard you get agitated. It was the first time I ever heard you interrupt a guest because you wanted to cut them off and you wanted to say something. And it was in response to her saying, it's something like, why live your life in accordance with a God when there's no proof that he exists? And that was when you burst in and you, oh, wait now, I have to say that that kind of offends me. And I was like, wow, two things. The first time I'd ever heard you do that. And secondly, um, how awesome that that's the extent of your anger. I'm from America, believe me, conversations don't go that nicely. But anyway, so what stuck out to me about it, I guess, was that it seemed like such an innocuous thing to say. I mean, how many guests have you had on your show denying that the evidence for God was good? And yet the way that she phrased it set you off. Um, and that really, it set me on a chain to thinking as I continued to listen to your podcast. At dozens of hours now, I've listened to your podcast. And it got me thinking that never do they discuss exactly what skeptics look for in evidence. They'll discuss specific cases, but not in general. So I just wanted to lay that out real quickly. From my point of view, I'm sure you've had this discussion before, but I never hear it on the podcast. Twice now, I've heard guests bring up the word falsifiability, and I'm sure I mean, it goes by without any kind of fanfare. So I'm assuming it's on your mind at least part of the time. But Brett Weinstein brought it up very briefly in the live show that you did. And then another, I can't remember his name. I wish I could so I could give him credit for it. But he mentioned it a couple times right at the end of the interview. He was a young scientist that you had on to discuss, I believe it was abiogenesis. And he didn't know it was a Christian show when he went there. So the joke was being made that he showed up and he was like, oh no, I'm in a Christian radio show here to discuss science. This might not go well. But it did. It went just fine. Again, because you're such a gracious and kind host. Anyway, so that word falsifiability stuck out because hardly anybody ever uses it, and nobody really stuck around to discuss it when it was brought up. So why is that important to me? Well, hypotheses do explain the world around us. Hypotheses are supposed to explain what's happened in the past, explain what we see in the natural world now, or in humans, whatever. Like evolution and intelligent design. They both explain the diversity of life. They both look back to the past, they look to the present, and they say, aha, this can be explained with evolution. This could also be explained with intelligent design. So, how are we to choose between the two? Well, that word falsifiability is so important to me because if a hypothesis is also falsifiable, if there's some evidence I could bring out to show you that your hypothesis is wrong and you have to discard it, then that makes it more powerful every time I don't find that. So, for example, with evolution, if I said, find me a rabbit fossil on the same rock layer as a T Rex, then everything I know about the timetable of the development of life, how it happened, the direction it took, how genes were passed between species, everything is gone. I have to completely rethink the whole thing. We have fossilized dinosaur poop, and we can look for seeds in it or types of plants. If we ever found a modern plant in fossilized dinosaur poop, boom, it's all gone. We can actually see the progression of plants. and earlier rock layers through this poop. We know about when grass came about because of that. Um, but you're never going to find a daylily seed in fossilized dinosaur poop. If you did, again, at least whole sections of what we think we know about evolution would have to go immediately out the window. What about intelligent design? I can't think of a single thing I would ever be able to show somebody who believed in intelligent design and say, look at this fact, look at this new discovery that we verified, look at this data, look at this experiment. This proves that it's wrong. I can't imagine an intelligent design advocate ever saying, oh gosh, you're right, look at that piece of data. I guess God didn't create life. It just wouldn't happen. So that falsifiability, every time we don't find something, makes it a stronger argument. And what goes beyond that, making a high stakes prediction, being able to look to the future, not just explain the past and the present, but look to the future and say, if I see this, then my theory is correct. If I don't see this, then my theory is wrong. So famously, and you probably had this discussion before somewhere, Einstein back in the early 1900s, whenever there was a solar eclipse planned, he said, here's what you should see as the light moves through the curvature in space created by the moon. If you don't see that, then relativity doesn't work. It's a bad hypothesis, and we should discard it along with everything else. But we did see that. It was a high stakes prediction. Again, can you imagine any kind of high stakes prediction that you would make in order to prove intelligent design? Is there something an intelligent design advocate would say that I'm going to predict this about the future? If we see it, then I'm right. If we don't see it, then I'm wrong. I have to abandon my hypothesis. It just wouldn't happen. So whenever the young lady, Ariane, I think I'm saying her name right, said there's no evidence for God, I'm sure what she meant was there's none of that really good high stakes evidence for God. Think of the Bill Nye Ken Ham debate, the last 5 minutes, I think it was. What would it take for you to convince you that you're wrong? And Bill Nye said, evidence. He said, just show me some evidence, show me some data collected, and if it proved that evolution was incorrect, I would have to discard it. And Ken Ham's response was nothing. Nothing could ever change my mind. Now, does that mean that not falsifiable or not making high stakes prediction is a bad hypothesis or a bad theory? No, not at all. It could still be true. It just means that it doesn't quite have the strength of convincing people. For instance, global warming. As far as I know, nobody's making high stakes predictions about global warming. Nobody's saying there will be a hurricane next June, and if there's not, then global warming is not happening. Nobody's saying anything like that. Nobody's saying exactly how much the temperature will go up. Nobody's making those predictions. So what makes that better than the morality argument for God that you like to make, or better yet, the fine-tuning argument? Well, with the fine-tuning argument, there's a lot of stuff we still don't know. So if you want to make a probabilistic argument based on fine-tuning, you're going to have to convince me that all those variables, all those constants, actually could be different than they are now. And then I'm not sure that it would really matter because they are, and that's why we're here to ask those questions. If they weren't, then we wouldn't, there's a fuzzy area in there. I don't know how to put a probability on the universe being fine-tuned. But whenever they do all the statistical analysis of global warming, they know everything about the situation. There are no questions that we don't know the answer to. We know how much carbon dioxide there is in the atmosphere, and we have known for decades now that we've kept track of it. We know the effect of that. We can measure the temperature. We can measure human output of CO2 and compare it to natural sources of greenhouse gases. So we have this vast reservoir of data and information to look at. We can put in computer models, work them backwards, and see if those computer models accurately predict the past, or start them in the past and see if they predict the present. And if they do, then we can run them out to the future and see what they do for the future. We can't do that with fine tuning. So that doesn't mean that the fine tuning argument is wrong or bad, or that there couldn't be a God that fine tuned the universe. It just means that I don't know how to put a probability on it. So just throwing out, it's a probabilistic argument, Occam's razor, things like that. It's not working for me. Now, I'm not saying any of this to criticize you or your show. I love the show. Like I said, dozens of hours spent listening to it, and I love the fact that it exists. But if you want to convince skeptics, those are some of the hurdles to overcome when you're presenting. So good luck with the show. I love it. Thank you.